Have you ever been in a relationship where you felt like the only adult? Now you're looking at this person that you love and wondering how on earth the two of you could have such polar opposite experiences. And maybe you've even called them a narcissist, but sometimes it doesn't quite fit. You know their behavior hurts, it's confusing, and you're left questioning, is it narcissism or could this be something else? And if you've been struggling with what seems like narcissistic childlike behavior, you're not alone. Emotional immaturity can look a lot like narcissism, and it's hard to know the difference. That's why in today's episode, I want to reveal to you the 8 signs that you're dealing with an emotionally immature person. My friend, by the end of our time together, you will understand exactly why they act the way they do and how to differentiate it from narcissism. And I will answer the all-important question with gut honesty. Can they change? Well, in case we haven't met yet, my name is Kris, and it is my hope to help you navigate difficult relationships and conquer codependency biblically. I also want to invite you to grab a copy of our free Narcissist Survival Guide. This is my free gift to you. I'll include a link in the description section below. Emotional immaturity is a lot like dealing with a child who just isn't equipped to handle life's challenges. And that's because they kind of are, like children. Because as children, they likely went through trauma or neglect or were never taught the emotional tools to handle adult issues. And we all know that children cry, they lash out, they shut down when things don't go their way, but because they lack the tools to process their emotions. But when those same patterns show up in adults, it is far more confusing and painful. And it can feel like you're constantly tiptoeing around their reactions, hoping that you don't say something that sets them off. And it can be exhausting and look a lot like narcissism. But here's the thing. God may be revealing their emotional immaturity to help you see what you're truly dealing with and how to handle it in a way that preserves the relationship and your sanity. So let's dive into the 8 signs that you're dealing with emotional immaturity. Now, the first sign can be a lot like a game of hot potato. Do you remember hot potato when we were kids? It is where the person just keeps tossing that responsibility to someone else, refusing to hold it for themselves. And that's exactly what emotionally immature people do when they blame others. Now, blaming stems from an inability to handle the discomfort of accountability. In emotionally immature adults, this is a lot like constant excuses, shifting responsibility, or framing others as the problem. For example, a partner might say, if you hadn't nagged me, I wouldn't have forgotten. Or a parent might claim, you're the reason I'm so stressed. Instead of taking responsibility for their actions, they look to offload it onto others to avoid dealing with their decisions. But Galatians 6:5 reminds us, for each one should carry their own load. God calls us to take responsibility for our own actions rather than deflecting blame onto others. Sign number 2 is like being on a never-ending roller coaster ride of emotions, where you're expected to hold the controls, but all of the buttons and the controllers are all mixed up. So you hit up and you go sideways, you hit stop and it accelerates at top speed. This emotional roller coaster represents the constant mood swings experienced in emotionally immature relationships. A minor infraction is now blown out of proportion, intense sadness is developed over small issues, and sudden anger is the norm as these people don't know how to properly regulate their emotions. And this can be absolutely exhausting for you as you never know when the next high and low are going to happen. But Proverbs 29:11 reminds us, a fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. God values self-control and wisdom, encouraging us to respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively. Sign number 3 is defensiveness. Imagine trying to have a simple conversation, but every word feels like you're stepping on a landmine. You approach carefully, hoping to bring something important up, but suddenly the air shifts. Instead of understanding, you're met with an explosion, a wall of denial, excuses, or even counterattacks. It's as if the very act of communication has triggered this invisible alarm. And this is the exhausting reality of dealing with defensiveness. It shuts down meaningful dialogue, leaving issues unresolved and the relationship completely strained. And Proverbs 10:17 reminds us, whoever heeds instruction is on the path to life, but he who rejects reproof leads others astray. We are called to be teachable and willing to accept guidance. But emotionally immature always have a "why are you always picking on me" attitude. They use defensiveness like an emotional shield, blocking anything that feels like criticism, even if it's meant to help them grow. Sign number 4 is victim mentality. Picture someone walking through life wearing a pair of glasses that distort every situation. They see every challenge as an attack, every problem as someone else's fault, and every disagreement as proof that the world is against them. No matter how much you support or encourage, their focus remains fixed on how unfairly they've been treated. This is the exhausting cycle of a victim mentality. It drains relationships, stifles growth, and it keeps the emotionally immature person trapped in a constant state of self-pity. And Matthew 7:3 asks us, "Why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but do not notice that log that is in your own eye?" My friend, we are called to self-reflect, not externally blame. But emotionally immature people don't know how to sit in the consequences of their decisions. They see themselves as perpetual victims, always blaming someone or something else for their problems. And this often looks like self-pity and can easily be used to lure in those unsuspecting people into their distorted narrative, because the victim mentality doesn't just stop with the thoughts. It continues until it finds someone to rescue them in their short-term behavior, and that rescuer now becomes yet another person to blame later. As you can see, it is a very destructive cycle. Number 5 is stonewalling, otherwise known as the silent treatment. Stonewalling is like shutting a door in someone's face in the middle of a conversation. It cuts off connection. It leaves its unresolved tension hanging in the air. And the narcissists use this as a control tactic, but emotionally immature people use it as a way of avoiding conflict because, remember, they don't know how to handle heavy emotions constructively, so they withdraw. But it's destructive to a healthy relationship. That silent treatment can be done on so many levels. They might ignore texts, walk away during discussions, or give you the cold shoulder for hours, days, maybe even weeks. And they may still talk to you, but intentionally withdraw affection. Anything to get the dynamic operating in their favor. It's kind of like the kid who holds his breath until his mother comes to his rescue. And if he has a weak, needy, or codependent mother, he'll know that she's going to come a-running. And the same is true for the emotionally immature person giving the silent treatment. It is a childish attempt at control. Sign number 6 can best be described like driving a car without brakes. Decisions are made in the heat of the moment, often leading to crashes that you both have to clean up later. Emotionally immature people struggle with impulsivity. They act without thinking, react to feelings or circumstances without considering long-term consequences. And this might look like overspending, reckless statements that they make, or snapping decisions, or that leave others feeling like they're frustrated or completely destabilized. And they're not just impulsive with their actions, they're impulsive with their words, declaring their undying love to you one day and then ghosting you the next. And now you can start to see just how damaging these can become when you start coupling these traits with each other. A husband may impulsively go out and buy a sports car and then blame you for not being supportive and using him for his money. A woman may go out and cheat on her husband and then blame him for never fulfilling her needs. Proverbs 13:16 says, "The prudent act with knowledge, but fools expose their folly." Emotionally immature people always feel like their words and their actions are the right thing to do in the moment, but are often left with regret later. And then they seek to offload that regret onto others, and that's where the unhealthy behaviors like blame shifting, defensiveness, or victim mentality are now added to the mix, further complicating this toxic dynamic. Number 7. Imagine being in a relationship where every decision, every conversation, every moment seems to revolve around one person. Their needs, their desires, their priorities. It's like standing in their shadow, constantly giving while they're taking without a second thought. And their actions scream, "What about me?" leaving very little room for genuine connection or mutual care. This is the frustrating dynamic of selfishness. It leaves others feeling overlooked, undervalued, and completely drained. And this may shock you. Selfishness isn't always intentional. In fact, it often stems from deep emotional immaturity and sometimes complete unawareness. And it can also be an overt, gimme, gimme, gimme type of attitude, or a covert, where they people please and concede, but with selfish give to get motives. But Philippians 2:3-4 reminds us, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Now, notice this scripture didn't say don't look to your own interests at all, but it says don't look only to your own interests. You see, in healthy relationships, there is mutual give and take, but emotionally immature individuals lack empathy and fail to see how their actions affect others, leaving the relationship one-sided and unfulfilling. Number 8 is manipulation. Have you ever had a conversation where by the end you're doing something you never agreed to or feeling guilty for saying no? It's like you're being nudged in a direction you didn't choose to, only to realize later that you were subtly steered the whole time. That's the tricky nature of manipulation. It's not always obvious, but it's definitely going to leave you feeling trapped and unsettled. You see, manipulation often shows up in emotionally immature people as a way to get their needs met without directly asking. And it's not necessarily calculated or malicious, and it usually stems from a fear of rejection, insecurity, or an inability to communicate effectively. However, this doesn't make it any less damaging to the relationship. And they may guilt trip with phrases like, oh, after all I've done for you, or I don't ask for much, or they'll play the victim saying, oh, I guess I just can't count on you, or I'm upset that you put me in that position. The intent is to offload their guilty feelings onto you because they lack the emotional maturity to process them properly. And while these tactics may feel unintentional, the result is still the same. The other person feels controlled, pressured, and emotionally drained. But Proverbs 11:3 reminds us the integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them. God calls us to live with integrity, and being honest and straightforward in our relationships is part of that. Manipulation, even if subtle or unintentional, undermines trust, creates conflict, and reflects a lack of trust in God's provision. Now, you may be saying to me, Kris, these all sound a lot like narcissism, and you'd be right, but there's a difference. The key difference between emotional immaturity and narcissism lies in the intent and self-awareness. Emotional immaturity is rooted in insecurity, a lack of self-regulation, and an inability to process emotions or handle relationships effectively. Emotionally immature individuals often act without malicious intent, and they may show remorse or a willingness to change when they're approached and given patience and support. Narcissism, on the other hand, is characterized by a constant pattern of entitlement, manipulation, and a lack of empathy, often used to maintain control and superiority. Now, while the narcissists also have deep-rooted insecurity and the ability to process emotions properly, they are rarely able to take accountability and they resist change. Not all emotionally immature people are narcissists, but I've yet to meet a narcissist that wasn't emotionally immature. So understanding these distinctions can help you label less and understand more. It can help you approach each behavior appropriately as you would deal with an emotionally immature person, vastly different than you would a narcissist. Now, here's the challenge with these types of people. It's not always a pervasive problem, and it's not always easy to detect. Just like the person who doesn't know how to read and write will learn behaviors that mimic that ability, the same is true for the emotionally immature person. They likely know enough social skills to fool people into thinking that they're giving, empathetic, mature individuals, but spend a significant amount of time with them and don't give them what they want or try to resolve conflict, and you're going to see the cracks in that facade. And that's also why emotionally immature people tend to have shallow relationships, ones that don't require much of them. And that's also why they think that their spouse or their significant other or anybody in their life that's calling them out is the actual problem, because they're the ones that they're having the problem with. And that's because significant relationships come with more commitment and requirements than those less committed relationships. So, how do you respond to these, unfortunately, emotionally stunted individuals? Well, responding to an emotionally immature person requires a combination of patience, clear boundaries, and grace. Avoid reacting emotionally to their behavior. I know, it's hard. It feels like you're constantly on high alert for their continual misunderstandings and reactivity, but don't respond in kind. Instead, remain calm and grounded, much like you would a child who doesn't know any better. Now, I'm not saying that you treat them like a child or that somehow you're better than them, but you have to use behaviors and language that meet them where they are. I know it's tempting to be like, dude, you're 40. What on earth are you doing? But that's like getting frustrated with someone who doesn't know how to read or write. Yes, they should be able to know how to do this, but telling them they don't and yelling at them and insulting them isn't going to equip them with the tools they need to grow. Instead, be gentle but direct in your communication to express your feelings and your expectations, focusing on solutions rather than pointing blame. I want to encourage you to set healthy boundaries to protect your emotional well-being and be consistent in maintaining them. Trust me, my friend, you're going to need them. And if you think the narcissist pushes boundaries, wait until you say no to an emotionally immature person. And of course, I want to encourage you to pray for them, because there is no one that is too far outside of God's reach. Look, I get it. Dealing with these emotionally stunted individuals is exhausting and unsustainable sometimes. Watching a grown man or a woman act in childish ways more often than not is enough to make you want to give up and throw in the towel. You want desperately for this person to address their issues head on, but instead they revert to these adolescent coping mechanisms. And you may be wondering, can these people actually change? Well, the answer is absolutely, but they have to want to. And that's why these behaviors can so easily mimic narcissism, because there's an element of denial or overcompensation that many adults, recognizing their emotional immaturity, are just too afraid to admit and get the help that they need to. So instead, they point blame, they deflect, they get defensive, all classic markers of narcissism. But they're also classic markers of children and emotionally stunted adults. Here's the thing, though. All narcissists are emotionally immature, but not all emotionally immature people are narcissists. You want to know the 5 clues to spot a Christian narcissist? Go ahead and check out this episode next. And if you are feeling overly responsible for someone else's feelings and behaviors, it might be a time to address the issue of codependency. And I created an online course that can help you conquer codependency biblically. I'll go ahead and include a link in the description section below.